All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Data is a Superpower, how to build a startup, data-centric startup culture. We have five amazing speakers here who are going to give you tons of information about building a data-centric culture. First of all, I want to introduce Hala Mary Hazar. She is the principal consultant at Diverse Data Consulting, where they work with clients to develop data-driven strategies to maximize business opportunities related to health analytics and business process management, leveraging Medicare, Medicaid, and commercial expertise as well as other industries. I will turn over to her to talk more about data.
Thank you, love. Let me share my screen one moment. Okay, great. Thank you. So today I'm going to be talking about best practices for a data analyst to communicate data to their colleagues. Sorry, it's frozen. There we go. Quickly, about myself, a little bit. I grew up in upstate New York, went to Syracuse, go Orange. Got my grad degrees, MS and MBA at Bentley. I am a yogi. I am on a number of different nonprofit boards. I'm in a classical choir that I've been in for over 10 years. It's an integral part of my life, and it's super fun. And most recently, I think last week, I just finished a certification of applied data science at Columbia. Sorry, I don't know why they're not forwarding. Okay, so a quick story. Who hasn't had this experience? You go out, you meet with a stakeholder, they tell you they want a report or some sort of analysis. You don't ask a lot of questions because you think you understand generally, what they're asking, and you deliver it. They're not satisfied. You've given them exactly what they've asked for, but they're unsatisfied, and now you're frustrated because you didn't communicate together. You didn't understand necessarily what they needed or what they actually were asking for. So how do we go about fixing that? First thing is clarifying expectations. So what is the ask? Understand what their ask is. Understand what they're going to do with it. If somebody asks for a report, is it really what they want? What is their end goal? How are they going to use it to make their business decisions? Is there something else that might be more appropriate that will get them to that end goal so that they're satisfied and that you are also very happy with your product? Is this a need or a want? Is this a nice to have? Is it something that's absolutely necessary? Is it an internal deadline? Is it an external requirement? Is it a federal requirement that doesn't have any pliability with deadlines? Understand what the expectation is so that you can help figure out down the line how you're going to prioritize it. What tool do you want to use as the end user to give to the end user? Are the end users really tech savvy? Are they afraid of technology? Is something like a PDF something that they're going to want so that they could just take it and make decisions? Is a dashboard more appropriate? Is this something that you have a team of analysts and they can really, be able to manipulate data? So how do you want to provide the data and understand who the end user is and what they can do and what they want to do and what they're comfortable with? What's the frequency? Is this a one-off report? Is this a one-off analysis? Is this something that you anticipate is going to become productionalized? Understanding that from the beginning may help you determine how you're creating the reports or how you're creating the analysis. Is it something that, is just quick and dirty that you can get an answer? Is it something you want to be more thoughtful because you're going to be doing it going forward or you're going to productionalize it? Who's your audience? Is your audience analysts? Is your audience executive team? Is your audience somewhere in the middle? Is it a mix of everybody? Would it be appropriate to have dashboards that drill down, that go into the actual detail that somebody, a manager level or an analyst can actually take action, but it summarizes up so that, trends are easily to identify? What is the time frame? Not just what's the time frame in terms of your stakeholder, but what's your internal time frame? And how do these align with the organizational goals? You're going to always have a lot of deliverables, and you're going to have a balance because people can't see all the other stakeholders that you're reporting to. So understanding how everything aligns with each other and being able to communicate how a new request fits in is going to be key to keep stakeholders appreciative, understanding, and happy. Next thing is consistency and data definitions. How are your measures defined? Are they consistent across the organizations? Do all do all analysts retrieve data from the same data warehouse and data lakes using the same definitions, or do different departments have analysts that are building their own in-house databases or different data structures that they're reporting off of? Are they defining things slightly differently? And now you have reports or analyses and decision-making that's coming out of different areas with different formulas and resulting in different measures that are the output that are now being used to make business decisions. You're going to lose trust if there's not consistency across the organization. Is there a QA process to ensure that the data is clean before it goes out? Is there a QA process of the data in the beginning to make sure that the data is clean and consistent so that when you're analyzing it, you can trust that data? And then finally, the data delivery. Test and iterate. Talk to your stakeholders early and often. Make sure that they're still in alignment. If there's something small that they thought maybe, oh, it actually looks a little bit strange and you need to tweak it, it's easier to do that early on than it is to do at the end. It won't derail your project if you're checking in and making sure that everything is going well and that everybody is happy. I'm not suggesting scope creep. That's not appropriate, and that's going to blow up your project and your timeline. But making sure that what you are presenting is actually what's in line. And if it's not, talking to them and figuring out, do you need to tweak this? Does this adjust the deadline? And making sure that everybody's on the same page is going to help you build trust and build success down the line. Can your end user navigate the tool? Whatever tool you're providing, is it a dashboard? Is it a cube? Is it whatever it happens to be, a Power App? Can the end user navigate it? Is it appropriate to have a training so that they better understand it and better understand what the expectations of running it on their own is? Would it be helpful to have some sort of training reference document that they can refer to afterwards if they have any questions? Going back to an original point, is this something that's moving to production? Once you get the sign-off, what's necessary to do so? And then finally, taking a step back in your post-mortem. What were your successes? What were your challenges? What can you learn from this, and how can you apply it going forward? Is it something you can apply internally just for you? Is it something you can apply across the team or the organization? And how can you benefit? And how can you help so that there's more trust and success across the organization? Thank you.
That was a great introduction, Hala, to building a driven culture. I think one of the questions on top of my mind when I was listening to you is, what are some operational processes that startups should focus on while with data as they're building their teams and cultures? So can you shed some light on how does the data, some operational processes for building teams?
Certainly. So it depends on the organization and the industry, but I think that it's really helpful for analysts, or at least an analytics type manager, to sit with different departments and understand what their needs are across the organization. And once you understand what their needs are, then understanding how better to use data to support them. They may not know that there's, a particular report or a workflow or a way that could assist them in order to make their strategic decisions. So really understanding, and that's going to be different for each department. It's going to be different across companies and industries. So understanding what their goals are, what they're trying to accomplish, and then what are their pain points and how you could best support them. And that, I think, is really helpful to helping build data within the culture and then actually building trust as well.
Awesome, that's super insightful. So to transition from the overview that Hala gave to more of the tools, etc., that we need to build a data-centric culture, I'm going to hand over my mic to Colleen Tartov. Just to give a brief introduction, Colleen is Director of Engineering at Starburst Data and has a PhD in astrophysics. And she's been obsessed with data her entire life. She's determined to make engineering organizations better for both humans and businesses through mentoring, leadership, and streaming processes. Her work on data engineering, analytics, and diversity issues has led to her speaking and mentoring in variety of venues in Boston and beyond. And we are super excited to have her here and share her insights with the audience. So Colleen, take it away.
Thank you, Love. All right, let me share. Okay. So as Love said, I'm Colleen Tarto. I'm from Starburst Data, where I'm a director of engineering, but I've been in data a really longer than I care to admit, from consulting to engineering to business enablement. And yeah, I'm just frankly really a data nerd. So today I'm going to speak about data literacy and give some practical tips to building a culture centered on data, as well as getting into the fun side of building that culture through games and prizes. So the first question is, what is data literacy? And so really it comes down to the question, Gartner boils it down to the question, do you speak data? And what we really want here, companies always have the goal of being data driven, but in a world where we don't use data to make decisions, to make business decisions, you really would just end up listening to the highest paid person's opinion, the hippo. And we don't want a world full of hippos. So it's 2020, we all have data, we have too much data, if anything. So let's use data to make our decisions. And so you want to really set your organizational strategies, you want to set company goals, you want to set organizational and personal goals with data, and you can use solid evidence and facts to make these business decisions. And so this doesn't mean that everybody in the company has to be a SQL expert or has to be a data modder, data scientist, but it does mean that data needs to be the common language with which we communicate and express our strategy and goals. So I'm going to give you 3 quick tips to think about and take them away. And there are things that you can do today to build a database culture and a data literate company. So the first thing is to start at the top. So you want your leaders to lead by example. You want company-wide KPIs or OKRs, so objectives and key results for those companies that use that. These should be exposed. And the great thing about this is that it leads to a culture of transparency, which I don't know anybody who doesn't want a culture of transparency. And so provide these numbers, talk about these numbers, make them part of the way you do your work and set your goals as an organization. Have a wiki page where the front page of the wiki is your embedded dashboard with your OKRs or your KPIs. And then also think about using all the way down to personal goals. You can use data for all of these things, and it'll just become embedded as the language. The next thing you want to do is keep it clean and simple. So this actually really ties in well with what Mary was saying. And you want to let users focus on the business questions. You don't want to bother them with things like, oh, well, the ETL hasn't been run, right? Like business users shouldn't have to care about that. And so the point is you really just want to be able to provide them with data that requires little to no interpretation. You won't want them to have to think about, well, did I calculate orders correctly or did I forget this other thing, right? Just make it easy for them. And the third thing, which I'm actually cheating here because it's actually 4 things, but we'll go with this, is to help users help themselves. So you want to focus on training, documentation, support, and tools. And training, you probably have people in your company, no matter how big your company is, even if it's tiny, who are data nerds. Have them train other people, have them hold office hours, have a Slack channel where people can ask questions without judgment, right? You want to document everything. I mean, you can go with some data cataloging product. There are a million of them on the market right now, but honestly, a Google sheet for a data dictionary is probably good enough, or a wiki page. From a support perspective, you want to have a good place that people can go with their data questions. And that could be a Slack channel, but you also want to have a person who is driving that Slack channel and making sure that questions get answered. So I've done this a few different ways, but usually it comes down to like having a support hero or a concierge, somebody who's monitoring that and who is the central focus, and it's a rotation. That works really well. And the last thing here is tools. So you want to meet users where they are. Now, I have a love-hate relationship with Excel. A lot of us probably do. But honestly, if people love Excel and it's what they're comfortable in, let them use Excel. Provide them a way of like downloading a CSV file and playing in Excel. And if you have the capability to be a little more sophisticated, you can get them a BI tool. Now, there's a range of BI tools out there. Some are free, some are exorbitantly priced, so pick one. You can also leverage your vendor for some of this training and documentation and support. Having a good partnership with a BI or a data warehousing vendor is key here. And then lastly, like if you do have people who are interested in modeling or data scientists, you can give them a hookup directly into your data lake or your data warehouse. So the last thing I'm going to talk about is gamification. So playing to win with data. And the key here is that you don't want people just looking at OKRs and thinking, okay, our company's doing well or our company's not. You want to make it fun to be a data nerd. So, you know, this might be my parenting strategy, I'm not lying, but, you know, bribery works. So make it fun for people to be a data nerd. Have contests. Have a contest to see who can create the best QBR dashboard, or have a contest to see who can fill in the most data dictionary entries, or have a contest to see who can create the dashboard that gets reused by the most people. You know, think of fun ways to give prizes. I have given swag, I have given gift cards, I have given props on a Slack channel. People love it, but it really helps people get excited about speaking the language of data. In fact, at one place, we actually had a prize. If anybody could crash the system, I was going to give them a prize. And luckily, I didn't pay up on that one. But, you know, it got people trying some crazy stuff. So it was fun. So make it fun and good luck. And again, I'm Colleen from Starburst Data, and we are hiring.
Yep, thank you. This was definitely very helpful. So in the interest of Startup Boston Week and everybody associated with the startup community in some form or the other, I just have one question. How organizations that do not have robust in-house data analytics teams leverage data to drive their culture?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because, yeah, I mean, I've worked at startups of all sizes, and, you know, sometimes you have a 10-person data team, sometimes you have a data person. And so I think that you need the one person to get it started, but you really just need to say, let's use data to make decisions. No one is going to argue with that. And so in my mind, I like to think that data and analytics are so key to driving business decisions that, like, with that one person, that should be one of your first hires at a startup. I, however, do live in reality, and I know that that's not typically true. So I think it can be anybody, though, like anybody who's obsessed with data. And usually, I mean, it is somebody, one of the founders of most startups is probably obsessed with data because they want to know how they're doing. So the good news is it's easy to convince people to use data. It's easy to bring this in at an early stage. It's a little harder if it's a later stage and people aren't used to this and, you know, they've never seen a BI tool before. But I think there's always room for improvement, and having the games can really help people. People love prizes.
Absolutely. I completely agree with it. So yeah, I think we've touched upon a few things here with Hala and Colleen. So let's take it a step further and talk about how does data interact with the larger ecosystem. And I want to bring in Dr. Linda here. She is the founder and principal consultant at Auroral LLC, essentially where they provide consulting and research services in machine learning, statistical modeling, and network systems to their clients. So she's the resident technical expert on this panel. She is an inventor and has a number of patents on her name and has published and presented numerous papers in journals and at conferences across several disciplines with a focus on big data and analytics. And I'm super excited to hear from her about how do we use data for the larger ecosystem. Over to you, Dr. Linda.
Okay, thank you, Love. Let me just share my screen. Okay, so I've worked with companies across many industries, including clean energy, healthcare, telecom, and I've also worked with educational data. And what I'm going to do is highlight some of the issues I've seen come up and that people creating a data-centric culture should be aware of. So these are kind of just pointers to delve for each data-centric organization to delve further into. And they all have to deal with how your data and your data products interact with the larger ecosystem. So the first thing is understanding the impact of data handling and data quality. And unless you're getting public data, one of the first things, which unfortunately often is difficult for startups, is to set up a plan for data security and data ownership and privacy. And these are really important, especially with healthcare data, educational data, and other types of private data. Next thing is to really understand the data quality. Data quality issues are really common in all kinds of data. I've listed a number here that commonly occur, and if they're not handled properly, biases and inaccuracies can result. So it's important to really understand that. I know a lot of times you can get a tool which cleanses your data or handles your missing data or handles the data quality, but it's really important to understand the assumptions that that tool is using in their data cleansing and to make sure that your data satisfies those assumptions. Because if your data doesn't satisfy those assumptions, that type of data cleansing could cause problems for your data. So you really need to understand, sometimes you might not even know, are there certain variables relevant to your data, but that aren't even part of your data set? And this can often be difficult to know. For example, if they're trying to find out, what factors might cause a disease, you might not know what they are, and they might not even be in there, and omitting them can cause biases. And missing data is where you might have all the relevant variables, but certain samples may have values missing. So these are important things to kind of delve into and make sure that someone in your organization understands what the data quality issues are and how they're handling it. Just stuffing it in a tool and telling the tool to cleanse it, sometimes you may get lucky and it may be okay, sometimes it may not. So you need to understand what the tool's doing. Along those lines, it's important to understand how the data was collected and pre-processed. You need to know when it was collected to make sure it's still relevant when you're going to use it, where, what kind of sampling methodology was used. And it's really important to know the accuracy of your data, because if you're creating a data product, for example, you're rating different products or services, and somebody's going to make a decision based on that, they don't want to be making their decision based on statistical noise. So it's really important to know the accuracy of your data and to report it. And it's also important to confer with domain experts to learn about different conventions in data reporting and different ways data might be coded, so you really have a good understanding of your data. And finally, it's important to document all of the assumptions, the collection, how it was processed, any limitations, any accuracies or biases that may be in your data, because when your data is handed off to somebody else to use, they need to know these so they're not misusing it. So it's really, a lot of times data is used and passed on, and there can be unintended consequences if there's inappropriate use. So for example, you want to make sure that the scenarios for use align with the scenarios representing by the sampling. So one example, right now there's a lot of COVID-19 vaccine trials going on in adults. And one wouldn't want to just take the data collected from those trials and use only that data to decide on the vaccines for children, because there were no children included in those trials. So that would be a mismatch of alignment. You'd need additional data if you're going to look at children. You also want to understand how the errors in the data propagate when you pass that data on. So for example, if your data product is weather forecasts and you're handing those weather forecasts off to another organization, which is going to use the weather forecast to predict energy use in a home, then you want to make sure that the errors in your forecast or uncertainty in your forecast are well understood by those who are going to be using it to predict energy use. Next, it's really important to understand how use of the data products evolve in time. And one example is, for example, self-driving cars. They may be tested with a driver who had never been in a self-driving car before, and they're probably paying attention a lot the first time they're testing it. But once that driver uses a self-driving car for many months, they may not be watching the road as carefully, unfortunately, although they should. And so you want to then make sure that you understand that evolution in time and retest with the current circumstances. So you need to update your input data according to how the use of your product evolves. And finally, it's important to acknowledge, I think as at least one of the other speakers has mentioned, that there's can be an awful lot of data, and sometimes it can be a computational or human burden. If there's irrelevant data or data that's highly redundant and doesn't provide much additional information, there's a security risk in storing it. There's also a huge computational burden, depending on what you're doing with the data with some of these machine learning techniques in processing the data. And that burden has both a financial cost and an energy cost. So you don't want to be just processing data that's not giving value. And finally, there can be a human burden in that if you're trying to give surveys, say, to customers, and you have lots of redundant questions, the customers will be less likely to complete the survey. So you want to really just figure out what's the real information I need. How do I have succinct, valuable data that's not redundant and that is relevant? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Linda. You really touched upon a great subject about how to get the relevant data, etc. So I want to take it a little further and ask you about what are some methods in your experience to building a data-centric culture, which works in theory, but a lot of organizations are not focused on right now.
Okay, so I would say there's two things. One is it is hard to get this expertise, but it is good if someone in the organization has a solid background in statistics, because to really understand a lot of these issues like bias, inaccuracy, sampling, you need some statistical expertise, and to understand, what's the effect if I omit this variable. The other thing is, which I think others might have touched on to some extent, the first thing I would do is look at the, step back and get the big picture, how is my data going to be used in the ecosystem, and to also anticipate future uses. How is it going to be used today, tomorrow, how is it going to be used down the road, and then go back and delve into the data and into the data processing and saying, are the scenarios and samples and people and populations I included representative of how it's going to be used? And, was my processing correct for that? So it's first a step back and then a really focus in on those questions.
No, thank you very much. This was super insightful. I mean, we've been talking about data and building a data-centric startup culture for the last 30 minutes, and we've not brought up metrics yet, which probably is one of the key things to building a data-centric culture. So I would like to turn it over to Kali, who is going to hone on that and basically give us more insight about how to build metrics. And before I hand it over to her, Kali is a founder at DataMind. She is being dedicated to increasing data literacy and empowering data-minded decision-making. She also currently leads the business operations at Spectrum Equity and has accumulated over 10 years of global experience in data analytics, revenue management, strategy consulting, and leading operations, all centered on one skill, and which is the ability to leverage data. So I am super excited to listen to her. So turning it over to you, Kali. You're on mute, Kali.
Sorry, thank you. And thank you so much, Love. I'm actually going to be spending a lot of time today talking mostly about how to try not to perfect your metrics rather than define specifically what they are. We can potentially, if people are interested in that, we can do that another time. But actually, one of the things that Dr. Linda brought up just now is the fact that we are now in an age where you can actually store a lot more data a lot more easily. And so all of a sudden we have decision points about what we want to store or not. And so I'm going to start out with a little bit of a bold statement, which is that I can see your future, which I know that that's really bold, especially this year more than any other. But the reality is, if you're just starting out your data journey in your organization, the reality is that you will be in this situation, whether it's in a physical boardroom or in a virtual one, just like this, which is you will start to put data out there, whether it's through a report, dashboard, or product, and someone will find an exception. Someone will think, did you count this? Did you take into consideration that? Well, what about Q2 during COVID, et cetera? And this can suddenly take you down a rabbit hole that is very, very dangerous for a number of reasons. One is it will take it can undermine the trust that both Hala and Colleen alluded to in the beginning, which is absolutely essential to being successful and planting those roots for a data-centric culture. And number two, it can cost you a lot of time and money, right? So I've been involved with projects where that exact thing happened. It started out in a boardroom. Suddenly someone realized correctly, actually, that there was missing data or missing information. And that spun into a data warehouse project that spanned 5+ years and never actually gave return on that. So my focus ever since that moment in time was trying to find the 80-20 balance between what we actually need to focus on in order to inform and make good decisions versus, just trying to get the perfect data set based on everything that we possibly could collect ever. Now, I know that some of you are out there and you are, new analysts or you're engineers, and you are just, you can't help it. You want your data to be absolutely perfect. And you are going to be the person who stands up in that room with that person who found the exception and says, yes, you're absolutely right. There is an exception here. And there's also this one and also that one. You're undermining yourself, in my opinion. And I think that it's really important that we all keep our eye on the ball of, will the refinements that we're talking about making, no matter how correct they may make the data set, will they have a material impact on decision support? Now, could that possibly be a more vague consultancy question? No, it couldn't. But the reality is, what I'm trying to say is it going to make a difference? If you're asking a question of your business, am I going to make more money? Is this going to help me generate more leads? Like adding in that extra nugget of data, is that going to help you? That's what I'm trying to say with this question. And the way that you can answer that question needs to be intentional, right? So the analyst will have had to have been in the organization for many years before they can answer this question on their own. The strategic leaders, the functional heads, anyone else potentially can't by themselves, right? So what I want to talk a little bit about over the next couple of minutes is how to answer this question and how to use that to propagate more data centricity throughout your culture. It starts with getting people in a room. So a lot of people talk to me about, like, where have you spent most of your time? My entire career has been centered on analytics. And honestly, it's been 50-50, both in development and in doing actual heavy lifting, whether it's building data warehouses, building data structures, reports, analytics, visualizations, and talking to the business. And so I know that people might not want to hear that. They might think, no, I'm an introvert, but it's in order to be successful, in my experience, the organizations I've worked with, it's very important to take the time to invest, to sit down and understand the business, which Paula and Colleen have already outlined, right? So the people that I want you to get in the room with, again, I'm being vague because they vary based on the size of your organization, are your strategic leader, functional head or heads, and analysts. When I say analysts, I mean the people who will be building the thing. I don't mean analytics managers. I don't mean analytics directors. I've been both, and I've sat in these rooms and then I've tried to translate. I personally like to minimize the game of telephone as much as possible for obvious reasons. I think once you get these people in the room, one thing that should happen, in my opinion, that doesn't happen very often, at least in the US, is you really clearly define what each person's role is in that conversation. The role of the strategic leader is to define the decision point. What's the question that they want to answer? Like Colleen mentioned, it's probably the founder. They're probably already super data geeks, and they're like, I just want to know, like, we're spending all this marketing money now. I'm so excited. I've got Marketo going. I've got pay-per-click. I've got all these things. What is, like, which one's working? And of course, there's a billion ways to answer that with data, right? Enter functional lead. Functional lead is there to translate, okay, cool, so you want to understand what's going well with marketing. And by the way, your definition of well is volume or revenue or something else. Most likely it's one of those two, right? So let's say it's volume. Functional lead comes in and says, yep, we've had this conversation a million times. That's why I built my tactical strategy here. That's why we've got these 3 people doing these 4 things. Okay, so these are the things that we're trying to do. We're going to really focus on SEO on Google. We're going to invest in this partnership, and we're going to hope that that pans out. And we're actually going to do some paid. Let's pretend that this is back in the day. We're doing TV ads, right? And so then those are your 3 primary channels. So already you've gotten to a point where if you're in that first room where everyone's talking about, oh, well, what about the Instagram influencer channel? Who cares? Nobody cares. It's fine. That was not one of the 3 primary channels. That is the strategic direction. And there are exceptions to this. And the exception to this is this. There's going to be a time in the very beginning of your journey, or right after a pivot, where you don't know. You truly don't know. You're in testing mode. You're testing everything. In that case, you don't try to make an operationalized database, data warehouse, set of dashboards. You test and you embed your analyst within those groups who are testing, and you have them rapidly iterate. You don't make them make everything pretty and perfect. You just have them say like, okay, is this going to end up becoming a channel for us or not? So that's a subset. For the most part, if you're sort of going in a direction, the functional lead can say, this is what I'm trying. This is what I want to track. The analyst then is obviously there to translate that into data. Now, it is, in my opinion, relatively important that the analyst actually come to this table once they've had a chance to do two things. One is I want them to have actually had a chance to look at the data. So like day one, don't throw them in front of the CEO and ask them to have this conversation. Get them eyes on the data for a second. Then have them piggyback with people on the ground. So if we're talking about a marketing case, let's talk about actually having them piggyback behind people who are writing campaigns, sending emails, managing the paid ads, et cetera, right? See what's actually happening so they understand that data lineage and provenance. Again, in the conversation, we really need to have those roles well defined so everyone understands strategic leader decisions, functional head drivers, analysts, data. That's your role in the conversation. That's what you identify, you figure out, you land. Here's what's awesome about having a conversation where you have defined roles is you all know, okay, that's my lane, cool. I have one responsibility, I can focus on that. What makes it even better is when you matrix that across with like ground rules. And the ground rules that I would suggest are to make it an inclusive conversation where you're focusing on making sure that everyone lands on the same page by the end of it, not one person walks out thinking, oh, I have to ask someone else on the side. Second, it needs to be focused. So when rabbit holes start to form, somebody needs to relegate and say, okay, I'll look into that on the side and we can continue this conversation once we've got that answer. Most importantly, it needs to be persisted. Okay, so eventually you will get to a point where you will have consensus and alignment, and that'll be awesome. That'll be super duper awesome. But it's only awesome as long as it's remembered. And so I think, in my opinion, there's two ways to remember these things effectively. One is you will eventually go back out with a dashboard or a report or whatever. Have the sponsors from that conversation intro that dashboard, like actually, like over Zoom. I mean, maybe email, but if they're going to do an email, have them record a video, be like, hey, here's why we built this dashboard. This is what we're hoping to track with this. This is why we are counting these things. And I know that sounds crazy. I know that sounds like that's usually the analytics job, but it's really important. And again, from my experience, that is demoed by the person who actually asked for it for two reasons. Obviously the buy-in and the trust. And two, then they have skin in the game. So they can't kind of swap sides. They can't, when that conversation comes up again in the boardroom or whatever, they can't be like, oh yeah, why aren't we counting influencers? It's like, well, actually we made that decision. The second thing is I want you to persist it in your report. I don't care if it's a front page, a little like pop-out bar that can be on the top or on the side. I want it to be succinct, not 50 pages. You don't want to write the report. No one wants to read it. So like, let's keep this simple and small. And like, if we're talking about MQLs, this is what I mean by an MQL, right? And if it needs to go deeper, then subset it out so that it's easy for people to read. Once again, making a decision once is good. Not having to make it every week is better. So get in a room, ideally make a decision and keep it. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Kali. I just had one follow-up question. I think the three roles that you define are probably like spot on, but thinking about it from like a startup perspective where, yeah, I'm just a single person doing everything, right? So wanted to ask about a perspective of a startup leadership team. Like, what are the important kinds of data that startup leadership teams should be focused on collecting as they build their culture?
Yeah, so that's a little bit of a tricky question just because different leadership teams will have different goals, right? Like let's think about an app that basically wants to get a ton of users so that because their whole plan is based on their exit strategy, right? So like if that's your plan, then you guys need to get aligned and say, cool, we're going to be cash poor. We're going to be completely in the hole this entire time, and we're just gunning for mass media, acceptance, and then we're going to sell. And so it all has to be aligned on your strategy. Most startups aren't really in that position specifically. They need to generate some cash to make some hires to then get to that next stage past seed. So I think it's about really, you need to be able to say on one sheet of paper what you're trying to do. Are you trying to make money? Are you trying to get customers? Are you trying to be the best and be like on these 5 lists, and therefore you need to get this many media mentions? Like what there should be 3 to 5 things, probably 3 things you're trying to do, especially if you're that young, and then you should agree on a way to measure it.
Yep, thank you. Yeah, that was great. I think one other thing you mentioned, which was a perfect segue to our next speaker, is you're going to walk away with a dashboard. And I think that's where Marilyn's expertise comes in, and she is going to shed some light on like the data reports that matter to your business, how to present them. Before I turn it over to her, I just want to call out that Marilyn is a data and automation manager at HubSpot. I've known her for a couple of years personally, so I can vouch she's one of the experts in data reporting. She manages the business intelligence team at HubSpot through several high-stake reporting changes, including like new products, pricing, and reporting technologies. She's also very passionate about using her skill set to support minorities in tech, as seen through her role as vice president of the Boston chapter of the National Society of Black Engineers. So kudos to you, Marilyn. I am looking forward to hearing from you. Take it away. You are on mute.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yes, but I can't see your screen.
Awesome. All right, well, I just want to say I am so excited to be here today. I think this is like the perfect subject because it kind of aligns to what everyone was kind of talking about today. So I'll warn you in advance, I get really excited about data. So I just want to say thank you. And so today I'll be discussing data reports that matter the most to your business and the best way to present them. I think it goes without saying that data can make or break your company success. I have about 15 years of experience in engineering and BI, and I can recall the days of working in retail and trying to figure out why margin is going down and returns are going up, and then kind of searching through reporting to kind of figure out, when did this start happening, and only to find out that somebody put through a policy change without letting us know, and then it just suddenly increased our returns and reduced our margins. And so I've seen, in person, the impact that data can have and how important it is to get ahead of these type of changes and things that can happen, especially as your company grows. So I want to take a step back and I want to look at, how do we understand our stakeholders? And as of today, I work at HubSpot, and we have this concept of inbound marketing that I actually think kind of works across the board. So I kind of want to break it down between internal and external stakeholders. So let's look at external stakeholders, for example, a customer. Well, you want to attract your customer, you want to engage your customer, and you want to delight them. You want to turn them from a customer to somebody who evangelizes your business and your product. And so data is integral to that because you want to make sure that you're attracting the right people, you're engaging them, that they're using your product, that you're delighting them and tracking your NPS score. But then let's also look at it from an internal stakeholder perspective. But reporting is important to kind of attract them, make sure that the technology that you're using is aligned to their technical aptitude. You're engaging them. The report gives them the data that they need and they can rely on it. And you're also delighting them by giving them the data that they need before they even know that they need it. And so it's important to kind of think of this as a flywheel. This is a process that kind of pushes itself along, and you want people to be excited about the data and reporting that's available to them so they can make their best decisions. And so I'm going to break it down into 4 different reports. This is not all inclusive, but four most important from my perspective is going to be financial reporting, making sure that you have the ability to check your financial vitality and the stability of your company in period and not getting that surprise at month-end close. So you want to make sure that you have the right reporting there. Customer reporting, you want to see how your customer is engaging with your product and how they're using it and identifying their user behavior. System health, and that's actually an internal report that creates alerting for engineering to let them know that, hey, if something goes wrong upstream, that you get some sort of alert to kind of let you know, not to use the report right now because something went awry. And then the last portion is going to be that KPI reporting, making sure that you have the intended impact to your roadmap and your strategy for being able to measure that and pivot with agility when you need to. So I want to look at it from three different perspectives. And what I love is I think that everyone has kind of spoken to these at one point or another. It's the timeliness of your report. For example, you want, as I mentioned before, you want data at the speed of thought. You want your stakeholders to have the data before they even know that they actually need it. So you want to make sure that you're ingesting the right data, you're modifying it the right way, and it's available to them. I don't think anybody wants to wait 3 to 6 months in order to get a report if they can get it, relatively quickly. Accuracy, making sure that the data that they have is accurate and they don't have to gut check it or pull out a calculator and sum up the rows of the report to make sure that it ties out. You want them to be able to trust your data. And then I think the most important part is usability. You want to create reports in a way that aligns to your stakeholders' technical aptitude and what they're actually going to do after they use the report. I've seen plenty of times where we create SSRS reports and then they download it to Excel, they manipulate it and pivot. And it's we couldn't always do that from the beginning if we understand why you need this reporting and how you're going to be using it. So I think usability is incredibly important. So let's look at what this looks like from real world experience. So I've worked in both retail and marketing and sales with HubSpot. And so I kind of broke it down with specific examples for each of these. So financial reporting, an example would be having a returns report that runs daily, that ties to your subledger. So you're not using a report that you think has the right numbers during the month, but when you do month-end close, it doesn't tie into anything that you were using before. And you want to use that because it allows you to identify the products that align to your customers' needs. So if a customer is returning a whole bunch of products, you might want to take that off of your website because then it's going to end up negatively impacting your margin. Product usage, from a marketing perspective or sales perspective, you want to be able to see who's using your product, how are they using it, is anybody at risk of churning? Does somebody need additional nursing to get them to pull them back into the fold? And so it's important to have these reports. I won't go through everything, but what I do want to call out here is timeliness and accuracy speak for themselves, but usability really should be determined by your stakeholder. And I think that looks different for everyone. And I think it's important in the forefront before you build your report to kind of work with your stakeholder to understand, what are you doing with this report? Why do you need this? Is there an opportunity to leverage another report that already exists? And kind of making sure that you're kind of testing their theories, testing their needs, and making sure that when you do build a report, if you decide to make sure that it aligns to what they need and that you're using the right technology that aligns to their technical aptitude. So I'm going to break it down into two things, three things that I think you should remember. One, your stakeholders matter just as much as your internal stakeholders matter just as much as your external stakeholders. There's nothing worse than creating a report only to find out a month or two later that nobody's actually using it because they don't know how to use it and it doesn't align to what they initially asked for. Timeliness, accuracy, and usability are the most important elements of a successful data strategy, and that looks different for everyone. But I think it's important to invest the time in the forefront to make sure that you have the right strategy in place. And then lastly, when we ask about, how should we present these reports, I think it goes without saying that you really have to rely on your stakeholder to kind of understand how they're going to be using this report, what their technical aptitude, and making sure that it's all aligned. Thank you.
Yep, thank you, Madeline. That was awesome. Did I lose you?
No, I'm still here.
Okay, perfect. All right. Yeah, I couldn't see you on my screen, so I got thrown off. So I think you touched upon this a little bit, but wanted to interject developing company culture into this conversation a little bit, because I think that's what a lot of startups are when they're forming. Everybody talks about, oh, you should build a great company culture, but how can organizations figure out the kinds of data that matter most to driving their internal culture?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of data that can be collected in regards that is actually populated by your employees. So using the surveys to kind of figure out, how do they feel about the management that's there? How do they feel that they're supported? Because I think those can identify indicators of there being bias or folks not feeling that they're properly or adequately supported. In addition to that, also checking reviews and the data that exists there to kind of see, are you promoting people externally versus building them internally, and making sure that you're leveraging your workforce to the most of its abilities. Because I think that does provide leading indicators as to where you might need to pivot to make sure that your employees are supported. And so I think that leveraging two things. It's going to be the insights from your employees and getting their experience, but also looking at your data in regards to, are you promoting the people in your company internally? Are you actually, is there a high turnover rate or attrition? So I think those two factors are really important there.
Yeah, that's great. So since we have only like about 7-8 minutes to go, I see one question on the chat, so I'm gonna pose that to anyone. So the question is, are there some methods to guide customers, both internal or external, as they think about usability?
One of the most effective methods I've seen is actually, especially in this world, is recording people's sessions. And I know it sounds really basic and really simple, but honestly, watching people, click through your screen and seeing what they understand and what they are reading first and what they see first, where they pause, and they can even ask questions if they're recording themselves on a Zoom video like this. That's, again, I know it sounds basic. It's not necessarily, that's not a scale, but that's when you're doing a beta test of a rollout, I think that's really effective.
Awesome. The response was interesting. Never thought about that. Thank you.
And to build on what she said, you could then also take data on that and then analyze the data. You do that with a lot of people.
So we have time for one more question. And so what role does data have to play in creating more diverse and inclusive startup cultures, if at all?
I think data should absolutely play a role. There's a concept of diversity debt that a lot of startups, think when they get bigger, they'll be more diverse, but you need to look at the data, because especially in a remote world, it's easy to forget who's in your company. And yeah, data should absolutely drive that. I mean, I think that should be an OKR or KPI at every company. Like, how diverse are we in which ways?
Yeah, and as I mentioned, it's important to make sure the data is representative of your population and of different situations, and that can have to make sure the data is used correctly and representative as well.
I think the only thing I'd add to that is that we talk about diversity a lot, and I feel like sometimes organizations can see that as like, oh, I need to have the right counts of gender and race and all these things, and it's DE&I is really DE&I because of the I, right? And so diversity is great, but if you don't have an inclusive environment, so I think that running engagement surveys where you're really finding a way to ask and get genuine response and how inclusive people find the organization to be is important.
Awesome. I think this was great. Any final thoughts that anybody wants to share? Otherwise, we can wrap it up. All right, perfect. Thank you so much, our wonderful speakers, Hala, Linda, Colleen, Kali, and Madeline, for giving us some wonderful insights today. I really want to thank everybody in the audience as well